Millionaire widowed father arrives early at his mansion and comes across a scene that made him cry. Have you ever wondered what truly makes a child smile? Is it expensive toys, luxurious vacations, or a house as big as a castle? Maybe those are the things adults think matter. But for a child, happiness often comes from something far simpler, like baking a cake with their mom or receiving a hug just when they need it most. We live in a world obsessed with material success. We work harder, earn more, just to give our children the best. But sometimes what a child needs the most can't be bought. The story is about a man who once believed he had everything: fame, fortune, a dream home. But after a sudden tragedy, he realized he had nothing left, especially when he looked into the sad eyes of his two young children. He tried everything to bring joy back into their lives, from toys to therapists, but nothing worked. Until one day, a quiet woman walked into their lives, a woman who had nothing to offer except hard-working hands, a warm heart, and a past no one noticed. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't a psychologist, she wasn't even a professional nanny. But in just one afternoon, she managed to do what he hadn't been able to for months. She made his children smile again. David Miller was 44 years old, a renowned architect based in Seattle. He owned a respected design firm specializing in upscale residential projects and had been named one of modern architecture today's top 10 most influential architects in the U.S. He lived in a nearly 10,000 square foot estate in Queen Anne with sweeping views of Elliott Bay. His home had everything people dreamed of: a private movie theater, a gourmet kitchen, a children's playroom, a two-story library, and gardens that looked like something out of a landscape magazine. To the outside world, David was the picture of success, and he had been once. David met Caroline, his wife, back in college. She was a gifted pianist, gentle, grounded, with a deep love for the simple things. Caroline was the heart of the family, the one who reminded David that presence mattered more than possessions. They married in their mid-20s and went on to have two children, Lucas and Emma. Their life felt close to perfect until a rainy autumn afternoon changed everything. Caroline was driving back from Emma's ballet class when it happened. A truck lost control at an intersection downtown and struck her car head-on. Emma escaped with only a few scratches, but Caroline didn't survive. David lost his wife. Lucas and Emma lost their mother in a heartbeat. The weeks after the funeral were a blur. The house was silent. No one spoke. No one cried aloud. Just a heavy, unbearable stillness hung in the air. David could hardly remember how he got through those early days. Each morning, he'd wake to the empty bed next to his and feel something inside his chest collapse. Lucas, once outgoing and talkative, now shut himself in his room all day, glued to his tablet, withdrawn from the world. Emma, only 5, cried at night, refused to eat, refused to play. She clung to her old doll, the last gift her mother ever gave her. David did everything he thought was right. He took them to child therapists, paying $300 per session. He hired highly trained nannies with degrees in childhood development. He filled the house with toys, bouncy castles, interactive dolls, custom Lego sets, even a mini arcade machine. But nothing worked. Lucas began losing weight. Emma barely spoke. At dinner, David sat alone in a cold kitchen while his kids pushed food around their plates and walked away. He felt helpless. A man who could negotiate million-dollar deals, design dream homes for the elite, yet couldn't get his own children to smile. Worse, he began to disconnect. The grief became an excuse to bury himself in work. He left home at 6 a.m. and returned late at night. Weekends, once filled with pancake mornings and park outings, were now ghostly silent. The house that once radiated warmth now felt like a mausoleum. Caroline's grand piano sat untouched, collecting dust. The kids' playroom echoed with absence. and David drowned in a loneliness that only deepened with time. He began asking himself, am I a good father, or just a man with money who doesn't know how to love? The answer would come, but not from a therapist, a doctor, or a parenting expert. Rosa Alvarez entered the Miller household quietly. There was no special invitation, no lengthy interview. She was assigned by a cleaning agency David had previously used for his office. After the house grew messier and more neglected than he could handle, he requested residential services. And so Rosa showed up one Monday morning right at 8 a.m. And from the very first meeting, David barely took notice of her. She was small, with black hair tied back in a plastic clip, wearing a faded navy blue uniform, old soft-soled shoes, and carrying a worn canvas bag full of supplies. She gave a polite smile as David simply said, "You can start on the ground floor. The kitchen's the priority." He didn't ask her name, didn't care where she came from. He just wanted someone to tidy up the house, to give him a small sense of control in a world that had fallen apart. What David didn't realize was that the woman whose name he barely noticed would quietly become the most important person in their lives. Rosa was 41, an immigrant from Mexico. She lived in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Tacoma, nearly an hour's drive from central Seattle. Every morning she woke at 5 a.m., prepared breakfast for her 2 teenage sons and her eldest daughter, who worked night shifts as a nurse. Then she took the earliest bus into the city. But what no one at the Miller household or even the agency knew was that Rosa used to be a school teacher. Back in Mexico, she had a degree in early childhood education and had spent nearly a decade teaching elementary students before life forced her to let go of the classroom. Her husband had disappeared suddenly, leaving her alone with 3 children and a pile of unpaid debts. She had no choice but to leave her home country and come to the U.S. Without recognized credentials, she took whatever jobs she could find, cleaning, dishwashing, waitressing, babysitting, just to keep food on the table and send her kids to school. But no matter what she did for work, Rosa never forgot who she was. A mother, a teacher, someone who understood that real care didn't require a diploma, just presence, patience, and a big enough heart. In her first days at the Millers, Rosa stayed silent and observant. She saw Lucas pass through the halls without lifting his eyes, glued to a screen. She saw Emma sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her untouched breakfast. She heard the dinners, quiet, joyless, with only the sound of cutlery tapping porcelain. What struck Rosa the most was what was missing. There were no smells of baking, no laughter, no family stories. But there were photos. On top of the grand piano sat a framed family portrait. A blonde woman, Caroline, smiling brightly with Lucas and Emma in her arms, David standing beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The warmth in that image was undeniable, and now painfully absent. Rosa cleaned as instructed, but she noticed more than dust and crumbs. She noticed crumpled shirts that hadn't been folded, dolls lying forgotten in Emma's room, children's books collecting dust. She realized this house wasn't just dirty, it was dying. And deep inside, she knew it wasn't because David was a bad father. It wasn't because the kids were difficult. It was because no one had truly acknowledged their grief. Rosa didn't speak of her past. She didn't feel the need to prove anything. She believed that real listening didn't require words, but time. So she continued quietly, doing her job. Until one day, while wiping down the counters, she heard something from the next room. Crying. Emma's crying. And in that moment, Rosa knew she couldn't just be the cleaning lady anymore, because a heart that understands pain cannot ignore the cry of a grieving child. That day, light rain fell gently over the gray skies of Seattle. Rosa was wiping down the kitchen counters when she heard soft sobbing from the small den where Emma usually played alone. She stepped quietly to the doorway and saw the little girl sitting cross-legged on the floor, clutching her worn-out doll, the one Caroline had given her. Emma was crying, but not loudly. It was the quiet, heavy kind, tears slipping down her cheeks in silence. On the floor lay a crumpled drawing, a cake covered in chocolate with 3 stick figures, probably meant to be her mother and 2 children. Rosa paused. She didn't want to intrude, but her heart pulled her closer. "Emma," Rosa whispered gently, "what are you drawing?" The girl didn't answer, just hugged her doll tighter. But after a few moments, Emma spoke, her voice trembling. "I miss Mommy's chocolate cake, the one with the smiley face. She let me pour the batter. I spilled it everywhere, but she didn't get mad." Rosa placed a comforting hand on her back. No probing, no soothing platitudes, just presence. A moment later, Emma murmured, "No one makes that cake anymore. No one remembers how." Rosa replied softly, her voice warm, "Well, maybe you could tell me what it was like, and maybe we can try to make it again." And for the first time in months, Emma spoke freely about her mother. She described stirring the batter with a wooden spoon, how Caroline decorated the cake with whipped cream smiley faces, how they sang "Happy Birthday" even when it wasn't anyone's birthday, just for fun. Lucas, having just returned from school, walked into the kitchen and saw Emma talking to Rosa, her eyes bright as she remembered. He paused, unsure whether to stay. But Rosa smiled and asked, "Lucas, did you help your mom bake too?" A simple question. No pity, no therapy tone, no pressure to move on, just genuine curiosity. He nodded. "I used to roll the chocolate truffles, but I ate more than I rolled." Rosa saw it, a tiny smile on Lucas's face, the first smile she had seen from him. She gently offered, "So, what if we tried baking today? Not your mom's exact cake. That one's special, but one that's ours. We can even give it a name." Emma looked at her, hopeful. "Can I pour the batter?" Rosa chuckled. "Of course, and if we spill, we'll just make another one." Lucas pulled up a chair. "Can I help with the oven?" And just like that, an ordinary afternoon became something else entirely. Rosa pulled out her old lemon-printed apron from her bag. She handed Emma a tiny one and another to Lucas, ones her own children had worn years ago. They got to work. Emma cracked eggs, messily. Lucas measured the sugar wrong. Flour ended up on the floor, in their hair, even on Rosa's nose. But instead of scolding, Rosa laughed. She told them about the time her youngest son baked a cake without sugar, and the family pretended it was delicious. While the cake baked, the 3 of them waited at the kitchen table. Emma, hair wild, eyes sparkling, asked Rosa about her childhood, her mom's cooking, and funny memories. Lucas stayed glued to the oven window, watching the cake rise like it held a secret. When it was done, the warm scent of chocolate filled the house, a smell it hadn't known in so long. Rosa carefully took it out, and Emma piped a smiley face on top with whipped cream. They cut it together. 3 plates, 3 spoons. Emma took a bite, looked at Rosa, eyes glistening. "It's not like Mommy's, but it's still really good." Lucas nodded. "I think Mom would have liked it." And for the first time since Caroline passed, both children laughed, not because they were told to, but because something deep inside had been touched. That evening, when David walked into the house, he paused at the kitchen doorway. He saw his children sitting at the table, faces smudged with frosting, Rosa standing nearby, smiling as Emma told a joke about their lopsided cake. And in that moment, for the first time in months, David heard something he thought he'd lost forever. Laughter, not from therapy, not from luxury, but from a simple cake and a woman with a heart full of love. Something warm stirred in his chest. It felt like a piece of him, something that had died with Caroline, was gently waking up, for the first time in months. His heart fluttered just a little. Since that afternoon of baking, something shifted in the Miller home. No one said anything out loud. There was no formal conversation, no questions asked. But everyone could feel it. Something soft, something warm, had cracked open, like the first light breaking through after a long gray storm. The next day, Emma went to school with her hair in pigtails, proudly holding a notebook and telling her teacher, "We baked a smiley cake with Miss Rosa yesterday." Lucas, once glued to his tablet, started coming down for dinner on time. He even said, "I read that sifting flour helps the batter. Miss Rosa knows everything." Rosa still arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. But now, instead of just cleaning, she was pulled into the kitchen by Emma, consulted by Lucas for cooking decisions, and more importantly, she was listened to. David noticed the change more clearly by the day. At first, he thought it was temporary, kids fascinated by something new. But a week passed, then 2, and each day the bond between his children and this woman, who weeks ago had been invisible, grew stronger. And David, he found himself changing too. That Saturday night, for the first time in months, he sat at the dinner table with his kids. No one asked him to. But when he heard Emma giggling in the kitchen and saw Lucas setting the table, he wanted to be there. Rosa served a warm vegetable soup they'd made together. Emma ladled the bowls. Lucas had baked garlic bread. The table smelled of real food. There was conversation. There were glances exchanged, smiles shared. David ate quietly, but it was a different kind of silence, peaceful, not heavy. He looked up and met Rosa's eyes, gentle, calm, and for the first time he truly saw her, not as hired help, not as just the cleaner, but as the woman keeping the heartbeat of this home alive. But not everyone was happy about the shift. Sarah, their current nanny, began to feel her role slipping away. She noticed the children listened to Rosa more. Emma followed her everywhere. Lucas pushed back against the emotional growth sessions Sarah had set up. One afternoon, seeing Rosa and Emma slicing fruit together, Sarah stepped in, her voice stiff. "Emma, you're not supposed to be in the kitchen with Miss Rosa. That's not her job." Emma didn't reply. She simply leaned closer to Rosa. Lucas, from the hallway, said, "But we want to be here. It's better here." Sarah said nothing more. The next day, she handed in her resignation, citing an unsuitable work environment. David read the letter and wasn't surprised. He had already seen, through a father's eyes, that his children had chosen Rosa, not through words, but in how they leaned into her, trusted her, laughed with her, and deep down, David knew. He was leaning on her too. The next morning, Rosa entered the kitchen to find David already at the table. He handed her a cup of coffee and spoke softly. "Thank you, Rosa. You've done something I couldn't. You made my kids smile again." Rosa gave a small smile. She didn't need praise, but she understood the weight of those words. David continued, "I know this isn't in your job description, but if you're willing, I'd like you to keep doing it. Not just cleaning, but being here, as someone they trust." Rosa paused, not because she was unsure, but because she was moved. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "They're still very fragile." David nodded. "So am I. Maybe that's why I need you here." She looked at him, and in his eyes she no longer saw a broken father. She saw a man trying to stand again, not just for his kids, but for himself. And from that moment on, Rosa knew. She wasn't just the cleaner anymore. She had become the keeper of a family's heartbeat as they learned how to breathe again, one small moment at a time. 1 month after that first afternoon of baking, Rosa decided to bring her children to visit David's house, a quiet way of returning the warmth his family had shown hers. She asked David one morning, and he nodded without hesitation. That Saturday afternoon, Mateo, Rosa's 14-year-old son, came with a soccer ball and a small Bluetooth speaker. Mariana, the eldest, a nursing student, brought her mother's homemade banana bread. From the moment they met, the kids clicked like lifelong friends. Mateo and Lucas were kicking the ball around within 5 minutes, already calling each other bro. Emma, meanwhile, dragged Mariana into the living room to play Animal Hospital with all her stuffed toys. Rosa smiled, a mother's quiet joy seeing something sacred begin to form. From the patio, David watched in silence. It had been so long since he'd heard those sounds, running feet, excited voices, spontaneous laughter. It pulled him back to when Caroline was still here, when the house had been truly alive. That evening, after Rosa's children had gone, David asked Lucas, "Did you like Rosa's kids?" Lucas nodded firmly. "Yeah, Mateo feels like a real brother." Emma chimed in, "And Mariana brushes my hair just like Mommy used to." David gently squeezed his daughter's shoulder. He didn't need to ask more. Something had changed, quietly, gently, but deeply. After that day, David began coming home earlier. He skipped evening meetings, silenced his phone during dinner. He never said why, but Rosa knew. It was for the kids, and maybe for himself too. Dinner was no longer a formality. Everyone had a role. Lucas cooked rice, Emma picked napkins, Rosa seasoned the food, David set the table. They worked as a team, not led by anyone, but held together by presence. One weekend, Rosa proposed an idea. What if every Sunday we cooked something Caroline used to love, like a memory dinner? Emma's eyes lit up. "Let's make her pumpkin soup, the one for cold days," Lucas added, "and the grilled cheese she made when I was sick." David nodded, warmth rising in his chest. He no longer feared memories of Caroline. He had learned to touch them, not to replace her, but to continue the love she had started. Each week came with a new dish, a new story. Emma drew menus. Lucas made a meal rating board. Rosa shared similar recipes from Mexico. And David, the man who once felt like a stranger in his own home, now sat at the table, listening, smiling, and feeling something he thought he had lost forever, a sense of belonging. One day, David visited the construction site for a new community center, part of a project his firm funded for underprivileged neighborhoods. Reviewing the children's area blueprints, he suddenly thought of Rosa, not because she was a designer, but because she understood children, with the heart of a mother, a teacher, and someone who had held pain and helped it soften. That evening, after dinner, David sat beside Rosa. "I'd like to ask you something. It's not like your usual work." Rosa looked up, curious. "I'm building a community center. I want a space for kids, not just to learn letters, but to learn life. I need someone who understands that, deeply." Rosa leaned back slightly, surprised. "I'm just a mother." David smiled. "No, you're the woman who helped 2 broken kids smile again. You rebuilt this home, not with bricks, but with love. I want to invite you to manage the educational program." Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Rosa placed a hand over her heart, not in fear, but in awe. "Do you really believe I can do that?" David nodded. "I don't just believe, I'm sure." Rosa didn't answer right away, but the quiet smile that spread across her face, gentle, honest, and full, was the most beautiful yes she could give. And from that moment on, something else began to bloom, not just in one household, but in an entire community, a space where love and healing would be passed from one person to another. Time passed quietly. Through shared meals, slow Sunday mornings, and the sound of children laughing in the backyard, David's house didn't just come back to life. It became a place people wanted to return to. And with that healing came something else, something quietly growing inside David. He couldn't say exactly when he started seeing Rosa differently. Maybe it was the way she tied Emma's hair with the same ribbon Caroline used to use. Or that morning, he found her reading a Spanish children's book to Lucas in the kitchen, her voice soft like wind. Or perhaps the first time he heard her truly laugh, unrestrained and joyful, when Emma smeared frosting on her cheek. David once believed his heart couldn't love again. After Caroline, he had sealed it shut. But Rosa didn't knock on his heart with grand gestures. She came with patience, with quiet kindness, with love so gentle it asked for nothing in return. And he realized he didn't fall for Rosa because she reminded him of Caroline. He fell for her not because she tried to fill a space, but because she honored it. She didn't try to be anyone else. She was just Rosa, and that was enough. Rosa felt the shift too, though she tried not to. She never let her mind go too far. David was her employer, a man who had once loved deeply and lost. And she? Just a woman who had once been left behind, who scrubbed floors to raise 3 kids. What right did she have to imagine more? But still, David's gestures made her heart skip in unfamiliar ways. One rainy day, he handed her a thick coat that had once belonged to Caroline. "She used to wear this when walking Emma to school," he said. But now? Maybe it's time someone else stayed warm in it." Rosa held the coat, speechless. Another time, when she caught a cold, David made soup himself. He didn't say much, just placed it on her bedside table and left. But she saw it, in his quiet care, in how he gently closed the door behind him. David was beginning to feel something deeper. Their affection wasn't spoken aloud. There were no grand confessions, no roses, no dates. It lived in quiet things. A glance that lingered longer than usual. A silence that felt safe. A dinner side by side, hands not touching, but hearts already had. The children noticed it first. "Dad looks at Miss Rosa like those movie dads do," Lucas teased over dinner. Emma added, "If Miss Rosa were really our mom, I'd be so happy." David smiled. Rosa blushed. Neither denied it, because they both knew if this love was real, it would grow, naturally, in its own time. Meanwhile, the community center project was blooming. Under Rosa's leadership, the children's area became more than a classroom. It became a sanctuary for kids with bruised hearts. She hired single moms, former teachers, women who'd been overlooked. She gave them purpose. And David, who once believed building meant steel and glass, now understood. To build a community was to build a place where hearts could heal. One evening, after a long meeting, David and Rosa walked home together. The sun was setting, casting golden light through the trees. David stopped and looked at her. Really looked. "Do you ever think maybe we didn't meet by accident?" Rosa tilted her head. "You think it was fate?" He nodded. "I think some people show up so they never have to leave." They stood there in silence, the world hushed around them. And for the first time, David reached for her hand. The hand that had held his children, held his grief, and now held his heart. Lucas and Emma returned to school as completely new children. No longer hiding, no longer quiet or withdrawn. They were confident, joyful, alive. Lucas joined the school newspaper. Emma signed up for the dance team, something she'd never had the courage to try before. Their teachers were amazed at the transformation. One asked Lucas what had changed, and he simply smiled. "Because now, I have a real home to go back to." That home was now filled not only with laughter, but with peace. Rosa was no longer Miss Rosa or the helper. She had become the heart of the household. David felt his life gently fill up again, piece by piece. He came home earlier. He helped Emma with homework, listened to Lucas talk about school. And some nights, the quietest and most sacred moments were spent next to Rosa in the kitchen, both reading, not speaking, yet fully connected. One crisp autumn afternoon, David planned something special. He called the kids out to the backyard, beneath the old maple tree Caroline had loved. On a small wooden table sat a warm teapot, homemade cookies from Rosa, and a small velvet box. Rosa walked out last, her hands still dusted in flour, hair loosely tied back. She looked surprised. "What's going on?" she asked. David stepped forward, gently took her hand. "I've thought a lot about what makes a home. Is it 4 walls? A shared last name? A dinner table?" He smiled softly. "For me, it was the first time I saw you wiping Emma's tears, listening to Lucas talk about his mom, coaching Mateo, hugging Mariana like your own. You never tried to replace anyone. You just showed up. And because of that, you healed us." Then David slowly knelt down. Rosa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The children held their breath until Emma shouted, "Daddy's proposing!" David laughed quietly, then pulled out the velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, nothing flashy, just full of meaning. "Rosa," he said, his voice trembling just slightly, "I don't want you to stand beside me. I want you to walk with me, to wake up next to me every morning, to be the woman these kids already call Mom, not because they're told to, but because their hearts chose you." He looked up, eyes steady and true. "Will you marry me?" Rosa had already begun crying, tears not from fear, but from joy. She nodded once, then again, more firmly. David slipped the ring onto her finger, and Lucas hugged her tightly. "Welcome, second Mom." Emma grabbed her hand and beamed. "I've called you Mom in my heart for a long time. I just didn't say it out loud." Mateo stood smiling, quiet, but his eyes shone with pride. A month later, Rosa and her children moved in officially. The house was reorganized, not into shared space, but into one shared life. Lucas and Mateo became inseparable. Emma and Mariana cooked together, danced, and shared sisterly secrets. David and Rosa, as always, kept things simple, but their glances spoke of love, of belonging, of forever. In the kitchen, Rosa hung a small wooden plaque. "Family isn't made by blood, it's made by love." Their story began in grief, passed through healing, and landed in love. And from their home, that love quietly spread. A reminder to the world, where there is love, there is home. So, in the end, what makes a child smile? Not expensive toys, not a big house, not luxury vacations, but love, presence, a warm hug, a listening gaze, a heart that truly cares. David once got it wrong. After Caroline passed, he tried to fill the silence with things, new toys, extra lessons, carefully selected nannies. He thought if everything looked perfect, the pain would go away. But what his children needed wasn't a solution. They needed someone who would stay, someone quiet enough to hear their silence, soft enough to hold their sadness, real enough to make them feel safe. That someone wasn't an expert. She didn't hold degrees or impressive titles. She was Rosa, the quiet woman who walked in to clean and stayed to heal. With a patient heart, she didn't just wipe away dust, she cleared pain. She didn't just fill space, she brought life back to it. David understood, finally. Miracles don't always come from the places we expect. Not from textbooks, not from professionals, not from grand advice. Sometimes they come from the person you walked past, the one who does their work with love, the one who enters your world, not to fix everything, but simply to be there. And that presence is what saves us. If you're waiting for a miracle, don't look too far. It might be right beside you, wearing an apron, holding a mop, and carrying a heart big enough to heal yours.